ultimately, they're not going to do anything with interest rates because it's not going to make that much of a difference. Surely, given the fact that the economy is there's such a big unofficial economy. On top of that, what about the rural areas as well? So give us a sense of how they can actually help the economy there in India and help those people who are, let's say, disenfranchised as well, which are the main victims of the pandemic.
Yeah, thank you for having me. And this is a great question. There's only so much monetary policy can do, and then it really needs to pass on the baton to the fiscal policy. I think what monetary policy can effectively do is keep rates low. That helps corporates which are sitting on too much debt. It helps consumers who want to take on loans to buy consumer durables. And I think we've seen some of that play out over the last year. So I think it did have to play a role. And the low rates have helped in the recovery, at least out of the first wave. But where we are now, and the difference in this time's COVID wave compared to last, we see a lot more cases in rural India. And you're right in saying that monetary policy has lesser efficacy to make a difference there. And fiscal policy should sort of do what is really needed. Now, things are working out for the government in a way. They do have some very good policies for rural India, employment guarantee scheme, a food distribution scheme, a cash transfer scheme. It really needs to now basically announce a new support package and put the pedal up on these schemes. So I agree with you. The baton has to move from monetary to fiscal at some point.
Okay, Pranjul, looking at this, I mean, there's a lot of debate about, and the reason why I asked you the first question was because of the divergence between the haves and the have-nots, which is seemingly widened, and then people talk about whether the recovery is going to be K-shaped, i.e. exacerbating those divisions, and on top of that, would it be V-shaped? So, this is alphabet soup, really, ultimately. But how does the economy evolve from here, and how does the Reserve Bank actually look at it? What prism does it look at all this with?
Yeah, so look, I'll talk about growth. What we're seeing right now is the second wave has peaked. The daily cases are falling from around more than 400,000 a day a month ago to about 150,000 a day today. It's still high, but it has peaked. We do think that in the April, May, June quarter, a lot of the local lockdowns are going to create a direct cost on growth. But even once the local lockdowns are gone, there could be some uncertainty in the system weighing on growth, until about the September quarter. It's only in the October quarter, the quarter starting October, where we think that vaccination rates could reach a critical mass. By December, we think about 50% of the population could get vaccinated. And that's when we think we'll see some really strong growth, this whole pent-up demand of not just goods, but also services. So this should, carry India through for the next couple of months. So in a way, we're seeing the first half of the fiscal year not very strong, but the second half of the fiscal year fairly strong because we'll have vaccination by then. Overall, for GDP, my forecast is 8% for the year, for the fiscal year. It's a little lower than consensus of 10%. And that's because, I'm not very excited about the first half where we're seeing high uncertainty and high COVID cases.
Pranjul, the big question for most central banks right now is when to normalize an easing policy. When do you see that happening for the RBI?
Well, not today, the short answer, but I do think it's something that's going to happen sooner rather than later. I think it's going to be perhaps in the final quarter of 2021. And I say that because by then, our understanding is that vaccination rates would have reached a critical mass. There would be an increase in activity. A lot of the increase in input costs that we are seeing, we can see that corporates are not really passing them on to consumers. They're taking them as a hit on their profit margins. But once demand rises on the back of vaccination, corporates may feel more willing to pass on these price increases to output prices. And that's when we'll see inflation soaring again. Already inflation was high last year too. RBI's target is 4%. Last year inflation was 6%. This year we think core inflation is going to be 6%. So RBI, I think, will start the normalization path, in the final quarter of 2021. How will it go about it? I think it'll be gradual. It'll suck out some of the excess liquidity from the system. It will increase the reverse repo rate. It will change its stance from accommodative to neutral. But the final instrument, which is the main benchmark repo rate, I think that will wait for a little longer. My sense is until the RBI starts seeing the private investment cycle rising, they won't be in a big hurry to increase the repo rate. So that's how I'm looking at the entire monetary policy over the next year.
Pranjul, you talked about how fiscal policy will have to bear the brunt of supporting the economy. I'm wondering how much space is there for more fiscal spending? I mean, how much more can the government ease its purse strings?
Yeah, look, that's a great question. And we already have public debt in India rising up to 90% last year. It was a big increase. And the space is limited. And that's why the government will have to do some targeted spending. But there are many ways to fund this targeted spending. One is you do disinvestment, and the government has plans to do disinvestment to raise some revenues. The second is a very interesting thing that's happened this year. There has been a large carryover of cash from last fiscal year to this fiscal year. Basically, the government borrowed more than it could spend last year. So that money is available to fund the deficit to some extent this year as well. So there are a little, few helping hands along the way. And I think the government at this point can afford a targeted, especially to rural India, a targeted fiscal support package.